So far in this chapter, we've been exploring how to apply effects to clips in which the change we create is applied for the entire duration of the clip. But sometimes you want the effect to come in gradually, leave abruptly, or even both. Fortunately, through keyframes, we can change an effect over time in either gradual or abrupt manners. So let's take a look at this. There are a couple of ways that you can work with keyframes in Final Cut Pro 10. The first way is simple, but in my opinion, a little harder to keep track of. And the second way is a little more complex, but in my opinion, easier to keep track of. So let's look at the simple way first. I'll go ahead and select this clip here and open up the effect browser. And I'm going to apply a blur, and I want a radial blur. Okay, so we'll apply that to the clip. And I'll open up the inspector. And I think I want kind of a lot of blur, all right? So we have a radial blur going around our spinning chocolate wheel. And I think about right here, I want the blur to go away, okay? So I want it to go from full blur to no blur in this amount of time. So we're gonna add keyframes. So I'm just going to press my up arrow, so I go to the very first frame of this clip. And then I come up to my radial blur. And right now I have a couple keyframeable parameters. The one that I want to work with is amount, okay? You can see that if I hover over this, it says add a keyframe. So I'm going to add a keyframe right here at the beginning, and then I'm going to go to the place where I want there to be no blur, about right here, and I'm going to add another keyframe, okay? And right now both of these keyframes have the same value, but now I'm going to change the value to 0. All right, so now over time, we should be losing our blur. All right, perfect. To go from keyframe to keyframe, you can click on this little button right here. Okay, so that's the second keyframe. This is the first keyframe. Keyboard shortcut for that is Option semicolon and Option apostrophe. Option semicolon to go to previous keyframe, Option apostrophe to go to the next one. If I would like the blur to leave the clip more abruptly, I would just need to add the keyframe a little bit closer to the beginning, okay? So if I wanted to add a keyframe here. Now, by the way, once you've added a keyframe, it sort of activates keyframes, and you don't have to add one every time. You can just change the parameter. Okay, so I'll just bring this down to 0, and you can see that this becomes yellow, and that means that a keyframe has been added. All right, so now I have two keyframes that are the same. Right now I have a keyframe of 0 here, and I have one down here. And I know that I can navigate from keyframe to keyframe, but I can't really see them in a better way at this time. So I want to show you how to open this up in the video animation tool. If you right-click on the clip and you say Show Video Animation or Control V, this big stack opens up above the clip. And a lot of these should be pretty familiar to you. We have our transform, our trim, our distort, our compositing, all of which we can absolutely keyframe over time. And then up here, we have our radial blur. Now, if I click on this button right here, you can see that we have our 3 keyframes, okay? So here's our starting keyframe, here's our ending keyframe, and here's the one that we don't need anymore. So if I click on this one and press delete on my keyboard, it goes away. You can also actually move these to the left and to the right. And then also if I hold down Command, I can move them up and down, okay? So this is the space that you work if you need to do anything more intricate than just simply adding keyframes and adjusting values, okay? So if I wanted to add another keyframe in here, I would just Option click, okay? And I've added another keyframe, and I can do all sorts of things within this space. All right, let's add another effect here. I think I want a mask. I'm just going to type in mask, and I want a shape mask. Okay, so we'll go ahead and add that to the clip. All right, and you can see that it gets added as second in line under effects here in the inspector, and also second in line in the video animation tool, okay? So let's go ahead and do it with simple keyframes in the inspector first, and then see how it translates to the video animation tool. So I'm going to press up to go to the beginning of the clip, and I'm going to just make some basic changes here. I want to make it round, and I want it to go all the way down to 0 here. And now I'll add a keyframe on radius. So this effect has a whole lot of parameters, all of which are keyframeable, but the only one that we're going to keyframe for this effect is radius. So I want it to open up by the time the blur is done, so about right there. Okay, so you can actually line up your keyframes in this way. And so I'll just click here, and now I'll add a keyframe here. And again, I don't actually have to click add a keyframe. I could just bring my radius up and it adds a keyframe for me. All right, so you can see here in the video animation tool that we have 2 keyframes. And if I play this, we should be ratcheting up on our shape mask at the same time that we're de-blurring. All right, that's simple enough. Now, if we look in radial blur, there are just a couple of different parameters that we can keyframe here, and we keyframed the amount. If we come down to shape mask, you can see that there are a whole lot of parameters that you can dial into, and you can affect each one differently with different timings, okay? So while we did something fairly simple, you can really get pretty complex with this. Now, one last thing, I'm going to show you down here, we have our opacity controls within the video animation tool. And the way that you can work this is that if I open this graph, you can see that there's a little knob at the beginning here, okay? So this might remind you of the audio fade knob that we saw in our audio right down here, okay? We are able to fade in our audio. Well, we can do the same thing with our video, okay? All we have to do, again, is open up the video animation tool. That's a simple Control V, okay? So Control V opens that up, and then we pop this open, and then we can just fade in our clip, okay? Now, there's already so much happening at the beginning of this clip that maybe I don't want to fade it in as well since we are, you know, coming up with the shape mask and also the blur. But you can also do it at the end. So if I come to the end here and I just do a Control V and I pop this up and we have the little knob at the end too, and I can fade that out. Okay, so basically it does the same thing as a dissolve, but we saw earlier that when you apply dissolves, it sometimes also adds a crossfade to the audio, which you then have to fix. So if you don't want to deal with that, you can just fade in or fade out your clip with your opacity controls here, okay? You can see how that looks. Okay, so as you can see, adding keyframes is a really effective way to add effect animation to your clips, allowing them to change over time in exactly the way that you want.